Yeah.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Let's start our Bible study by singing song number 311. This world is not my home.
This world is not my home. This world is not my home, I'm just a passing through. My treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue. The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Oh Lord, you know I have no friend like you. If heaven's not my home, then Lord, what will I do? The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. They're all expecting me, and that's one thing I know. My Savior pardoned me, and now I onward go. I know he'll take me through, though I am weak and poor, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Oh Lord, you know I have no friend like you. If heaven's not my home, then Lord, what will I do? The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. I have a loving Savior up in glory land. I don't expect to stop until I with him stand. He's waiting now for me in heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Oh Lord, you know I have no friend like you. If heaven's not my home, then Lord, what will I do? The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Just up in glory land we'll live eternally. The saints on every hand are shouting victory. Their songs of sweetest praise drift back from heaven's shore, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Oh Lord, you know I have no friend like you. If heaven's not my home, then Lord, what will I do? The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Amen. Sister Jiyoung, would you lead us in prayer, please?
Just be with us and help us take the message today.
Amen.
We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. All right, so we finished our study on Proverbs, and this week we're going to be talking about the Book of Ecclesiastes. A much shorter book, In the Jewish canon, I believe this is counted among 5 scrolls, or 5 small scrolls, because it's a relatively short book, 12 chapters, and you can read it all through from beginning to end without too much time. We're not going to do that tonight. We're not going to read it all through. But we want to consider it because it's really a unique book. It's a book that has it's unique because it's a divinely inspired book that deals with a question that lots of uninspired books have addressed. And I'm going to ask, I think, as our first question for today, what the theme of this book is. I mean, the theme, I think, as a curriculum suggested that or at least the outline that went with the curriculum suggested that the theme is, in the first couple of verses of this book, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. That doesn't cover everything. I mean, that's not the end of the story. And I'm not asking for the conclusion of the book either, but just simply, what is the theme? Because the theme, as I say, addresses a question. The question you can see in the 3rd verse, but I'm asking for somebody to paraphrase that in today's language. How would you paraphrase that question? First of all, let's go ahead and read it out loud. Esther, you look like you got it. Why don't you read that 3rd verse of the 1st chapter for us?
What profit has a man of all his labor which he taketh under the sun?
All right. So, how would you say that in modern terms today? There's not just one way you could do it. So there's no one single answer. That's the only way you could answer. Just asking for your idea of how somebody might phrase that today. Yeah, Sister Shetty?
I'm just thinking, could it be that he's asking that if everything is vanity upon vanity, then what's the essence of all that we labor for on earth?
Okay, right, okay. Anybody else have any other way of saying it, Brother Isaac?
Yeah, can it be what's essence of our pursuit in life without God?
Okay, all right. That's an interesting way to put it because although it doesn't say what's the profit of a man's labor without God, he does start. This is an interesting thing about this book. I mean, it's a biblical book, but it starts without any, I won't say God is never mentioned. He is mentioned in the book more later than earlier, but it starts from a presumption that we're not going to talk about God at first. We're just dealing with what we can see. But aside that, we can say what's the essence of our work, or what's the essence of what are we working for? You have a...
Yeah, I have written down.
Hold on, let me get, so you can get it closer to you.
I have written down here, the theme is answering the question of what is the meaning of life?
Okay, that's a more of a stretch, but it's perfectly valid. Anybody else have anything you want to add? I just want to make sure I don't leave anybody out. Yeah, so what's the point of all our work? What are we working for? What is, to expand it a little more broadly, what is the meaning of life? What's the point of it all? What is it all for? Why are we here? Well, yeah, that's stretching it even further. I actually thought when I first started studying this, was a popular song when I was a kid called "What's It All About?" There's another one. What's it all about? What's it all about? So that's really, in a sense, what this book addresses. What is the meaning? What's the point of it all? Why do we do what we do? What's the meaning of life? There's, like I said, lots of books, lots of lectures, lots of whatever. Whole religions have been started on that question. What is the meaning of life? This is a divinely inspired book that actually addresses that question. And it starts with a very materialistic starting point and kind of takes us through a lot of steps that sometimes may seem logical, sometimes may not seem so logical. But it's basically reasons through the whole process. Go ahead. You wanted to say something.
I was actually thinking about before I got saved, when I was like 9, 10 years old, I'll be going on the street and I will look at myself and I will say, who am I? Why am I here? And I will even look up. I had no idea about this book. And I had no idea of religion, Christianity. But there was that question in my mind, who am I? And why am I here?
Yeah. So actually, if you skip down to the 13th verse, somebody read that for us, please.
Thank you. 13. And I gave my heart to seek and search out by wisdom concerning all things that are done under heaven. This sole travail has God given to the Son of Man to be exercised there.
There you go. So that's why Sister Antonia used to think that as a kid. That's why everybody has thought it at some point or another, if they've thought at all. Because God himself puts that question in everybody's mind to be exercised, to ask themselves, what is it all about? Why am I here? What is the meaning of life? What is the point of it all? Yeah, there is space. There's... I won't bite you, I promise. And neither will my wife. So you pick whatever you want to. Okay. Sister Shade won't bite you either. That's right. So that's what this book is all about. Now, it's all through, again, the curriculum. In fact, if you look at the background, there's a whole section on Solomon, King Solomon, and who Solomon is. We understand this book to have been written by Solomon. Solomon's name, though, is nowhere mentioned in this book. So why do we have the understanding that Solomon wrote it? It's not a trick question. There are actually very good reasons for thinking that, just from the book itself. Yes, but sorry, Esther, I didn't see. You're raising your hand and you're covering it up.
It says, like in the first or second verse, that this person is the son of David. So.
Okay, so that's a clue, right? Now, we know biblically Jesus is the son of David. Anybody who's descended from David could be a son of David. But that's certainly a clue that he could be the son of Solomon. Yes, that he could be Solomon, yes.
But it also says king in Jerusalem.
Okay.
But the whole of chapter 2 actually talked about the experience of Solomon.
How so?
When it says, I made me great works, I builded me houses, I planted me vineyards, I made me gardens, orchards, pools.
Certainly Solomon did things like that, but do you think he's the only king who ever had anything built?
No, not all, but he said, I had wisdom more than all that were before me.
Okay.
And he was the only one the Bible said
Okay.
had
That's
wisdom.
that's a big major clue right there. Okay, she's quoting from chapter 1, verse 16. I communed with mine own heart, saying, Lo, I am come to great estate and have gotten more wisdom than all they that have been before me. That's what you were quoting, right? Now, you could say maybe he was just really proud and just thought he had more wisdom because he said it to himself, but it's likely that that's really true. Sorry, Brother Isaac, you were going to say something.
In addition to that, in verse 12, he said, I turned myself to behold wisdom and madness and folly. So you can say he is the one that went through all those.
Okay. Is there anybody else who was also of great estate and turned himself to, I don't know what you can say about madness and folly, but who had both wisdom and also was foolish? I can think of somebody, yes?
Like Solomon?
Well, Solomon, yeah, other than Solomon.
Oh, okay.
David? Well, this is the son of David, so it can't be David. Good try. Yeah, Esther?
Manasseh, maybe?
Huh?
Manasseh?
Manasseh? Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would ever say he had wisdom, at least not holy wisdom. I mean, he was a really, really wicked man.
How about Uzziah?
There you go.
Uzziah.
We didn't rehearse this. Yeah, that's a very close count. In fact, I would say, just me speaking, I would say I would put him at a number 2 slot. If we think Solomon was like the wisest man or the wisest king in Israel, Uzziah would be a pretty, I don't know how close, but a pretty decent number 2. He ruled actually longer than Solomon, and he made all kinds of inventions. He invented things that, frankly, you never read about again until almost the modern age. I mean, catapults and, that was from ancient times, and even crossbows are like a medieval invention. But he had machines set up so that he didn't even have to have soldiers on the parapet of the castle. They were like automatic firing bows and arrows that would fire almost like robot arrow shooters or something that he invented way back, before even the classical age. So Uzziah was quite an amazing, and he also kind of turned foolish, right? Because he got very proud in his heart. But that one verse, I don't know if we actually got it yet or not. Well, there was 1:16. Oh, now I've lost my place. $1:16. Oh, that's already stated. That was already quoted. But chapter 2, verse 9, was that already? There it is. I was great and increased more than all that were before me in Jerusalem. Now, that's not just saying I said that to myself, but it says as a matter of fact, I was more increased than all that were before me. Again, this is the Bible, so we got to take it as at face value. This is true. Was that true of Uzziah? No. I mean, as greatly as he was increased, nobody was greater than Solomon. There just wasn't anybody who comes close to being as great as Solomon, much less greater than Solomon. So can't have been Uzziah. Really almost has to be Solomon. There's simply nobody, because God himself said, nobody will be as great as him. None of the kings that follow him will be as great as him. So really couldn't be anybody else, really, from what we see here. Okay, that's kind of all by way of introduction. So let's get into the actual meat of this, the actual body of the book itself. We've already read the first couple of verses in chapter 1, and first 3 verses, actually. But let's look at verses 4 through 7. And especially pay attention to the 5th, 6th, and 7th verse of chapter 1. Go ahead, Gordon. Go ahead and read. Godwin. I don't know why I said Gordon. Go ahead and read that for us, please. It's on.
One generation passeth passeth away, and another generation cometh, but the earth abideth forever. The sun also ariseth, and the sun goeth down, and hasteth to his place where he arose. The wind goeth forward to the south, and turneth about unto the north, and whirleth about continually, and the wind returneth again according to the circuits. And
That's it.
all the
That's all we need. Thank you. So, no, sorry. Go ahead. Read verse 7 also. I said verse 7.
all the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. Unto the place from whence the rivers come,
Thither.
thither they return again.
Thank you. All right. Now, focusing especially on verses 5, 6, and 7. What do those, they're describing natural phenomena, right? What do those three natural phenomena have in common, apart from the fact that they're natural phenomena? What do those three things have in common in verses 5? The sun rises and the sun goes down, hastens to the place where he arose. The wind goes toward the north and the south, blah, 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 blah. All those. What do those three things have in common? You have to hold the microphone up to you. No, you don't have to keep pushing the button. Just hold the microphone up to you.
Because they all came up and went down.
Okay, good. Can we put a finer point on it, Majesty?
They're all essential for life.
They're all essential for life. Good. Think about what Godwin said. We kind of summarize that a little bit better. Go ahead, Sister Sade. Articulate that a little bit better.
They follow their natural process.
Follow a natural process, but what about the whole up and down thing? Yes, So-Yun?
I think this thing is go circulation and cycle and goes in endless cycle.
Right, that's right. Exactly, that's exactly the point. There's cycles, and I appreciate the fact that you especially emphasize they're endless cycles, because if you look at a line in a circle, right, drawn in a circle, where is the beginning of that line? It doesn't have a beginning, does it? You can't point, if you have a straight line, you can say, here's the beginning, here's the end. But if you have a circle, you can't just look at a circle that's already drawn and say, this is the beginning point. It doesn't have a beginning and it doesn't have an end. So just like he said, it has endless cycles. And he starts by talking about generations are the same thing. He says, one generation passes away, another generation cometh, right? So people are like this too, but not just people, but everything. So he's saying people's work is the same way. You get up, you get dressed, you go to work, you work all day, you finish work, you come home, you rest, you go to sleep, you get up, you get dressed, you go to work, and it goes on and on and on and on. He said everything is just like, so again, what's the theme of this book? Okay, what's the meaning of life? We'll go with that one. What's the meaning of life? What's the meaning? What's the point? Right? What's the point? That's the question. That's the big question asked. And he starts by saying, look, everything just goes around and around and around and around. If it's just doing this, where's the goal? There's no goal. If there's no beginning and no end, you don't have a goal. There's no goal. So where's the point? This is right from out of the gate. You know, you've got a quandary. You've got a problem on your hands because it doesn't look like there's a point. Where's the goal? It doesn't look like there's a goal. So, I keep losing my place. I'm going to have to put something in here. So this is the starting point. Now, this is what's really interesting. This is where, I mean, it's interesting from the very beginning, but this is one particularly interesting thing to me about this book. Now, those watching online may not see this as clearly. I don't know. I'll try to hold this up to the, oh, I didn't even turn on my camera. I'll try to hold this up to the Zoom, at least for the people on Zoom can see this. So just to give you a little idea. So you see at the top there, it says, nothing new under the sun. That's an expression that we know very, very well. It comes from this book. That's literally where it originated from. Then the second column says, no real justice. And the third column says Epicureanism, which is a real $10 word for folks, but some of you are familiar with that term. It's just basically, Epicureanism is just the idea of eat, drink, and be merry. You can just think of it that way. But Epicureanism is actually fewer letters than eat, drink, and be merry, so it fits better in the column. So that's why I put it there. But the point is, what you can see there is there are verses going across. There's actually a pattern, at least in the beginning of this book, where he starts out, okay, chapter 1, verse 9, we read all those things about cycles. Let's go ahead and read the no new thing under the sun. Let's actually read that out loud. Godwin, I'll let you read it only if you promise not to push the button on the microphone. Okay, deal? Okay, all right. So just hold the mic. It's already on. Go ahead, go for it.
The thing that hath been is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done. And there is no new thing under the sun.
Thank you. So that's they're all short words, but it's kind of a mouthful because it's so detailed. All things are, the thing that hath been is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done. There's no new thing under the sun. It's chapter 1, verse 9. So it's the first statement about this thing that nothing changes. It just goes around and around and around. Okay? But that's only the first of many. The next time he says this is in chapter 2. Now, this is where you see this. There's a pattern of first we say, look, there's nothing new under the sun. And then the next thing is everybody has the same fate. The same thing happens to rich, poor, young, old, the same things happen to everybody. And then, so there's no real justice. That's why I titled that No Justice. The same things happen over and over again, and everything eventually happens to everybody. So therefore, the conclusion is just enjoy, just live it up. Just enjoy the pleasures of this life. That's all there is. That's the only conclusion you can reach. So we see this more than once. It happens over and over. So not only is he talking about how things happen over and over, but he talks about how things happen over and over, over and over. There's like there are cycles of him talking about the cycles. So even his talking about how there's nothing new under the sun happens over and over again. Majesty, you had your hand up.
Everything doesn't happen to everybody.
Okay, well, we'll get her. Don't worry. We'll get that. I'm not saying everything that could happen to anybody happens to everybody. That's not exactly how he puts it.
Are you talking about like people, everyone dies?
Well, there's that, but you're kind of getting ahead of the story a little bit. But we'll get there. Don't worry. So let's start with chapter 2, verse 11. Chapter 2, verses 11 and I think it's 11 and 12. Let me look at my own notes here. Yeah, chapter 2, verses 11 and 12. Somebody, Sister Fawn, you get the mic right there. Go for it.
Chapter 2, verse 11 and 12. Then I looked on all the works that my hands had wrought, and on the labor that I had labored to do. And behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit under the sun. And I turned myself to behold wisdom and madness and folly, for what can For what can the man do that cometh after the king? Even that which had been already done.
Okay. So there is, so we've already seen, that's the, nothing new under the sun. Then, Highness, why don't you read for us, please, verses 14 and 15.
The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. Yet I myself perceived that the same event happens to them all. So I said in my heart, as it happens to the fool, it also happens to me. And why was I then more wise? Then I said in my heart, this also is vanity.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Why was I more wise? In other words, again, what's the point? What's the point of me being more wise if the same thing is going to happen to me and if somebody who's a fool? So the same thing happens. So there's the no justice part. And then moving down to verse 24. Esther, why don't you read that verse first, please?
Verse 22. There is nothing better for a man than that he should eat and drink, that he should make his soul enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw that it was from the hand of God.
It's one of the few times in the early chapters that you actually see God mentioned. And what you'll see, by the way, we may talk about this later, is that in the early chapters, almost the only time you hear God mentioned is to say, basically, eat and drink. That's the gift of God. Like God has blessed me. There's some people that the farthest they get with God talk is, my belly's full, God's in his heaven, all's right with the world. That's it. That's where God fits in. And that's basically the kind of talk he starts with here. So that's, God is out there somewhere. That's great. Now, if you move on to chapter 3, verse 15, we see again, like I say, it's like a cycle. It goes back to the same issue again. Sister Mary, if you would read for us, please, chapter 3, verse 15.
Oh, was that me?
Yes, that's you. Chapter 3, verse 15, please.
Chapter 3, verse 15. That which had been is now, and that which is to be had already been, and God required that which is past.
Okay, so there it is again. That which is now, has been, is now. That which is to be, has already been. And then, verses 18 through 20, Aza. Aza? Ooh, Aza.
My mic is continuing to cut off. I can't hear you guys at all. What did you say, Brother Charles?
If you would read verses 18 through 20 of chapter 3.
Okay. What book, Brother Charles? I didn't hear you cut out.
You don't know what book we're reading?
What?
Okay, don't worry about it. We'll have Brother Isaac. Why don't you read that for us, please?
3:18. I said in my heart concerning the estate of the sons of men, that God might manifest them, and that they might see that they themselves are beasts. 19. For that which befalleth the sons of men befalleth beasts. Even one thing befalleth them. As the one dieth, so dieth the other. Yea, they have all one breath, so that all man had no preeminence above a beast, for all is vanity.
Thank you. Okay, go read the 20th verse also.
20. All go unto one place. All are of the dust. and all turn to dust again.
Okay. So, and then we'll skip down. I mean, know that verse 21 is actually a very famous verse. Who knows the spirit of man that goeth upward and the spirit of the beast that goeth downward to the earth. So that's kind of a bit of a road bump in the reasoning, but there's the same pattern. So first, that which has been will be again, what will be has already been, and then the same thing befalls men and beasts. First, it was just wise men and fools. Now it's actually even men and animals. It even says people are animals because the same thing happens to people that happens to animals. They all die, they all go back to dust. Verse 22 is again the conclusion. Sister Shade? Or I'm not trying to overlook.
22. Wherefore I perceive that there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his own works, for that is his portion. For who shall bring him to see what shall be after him?
Thank you. So there you have it. There, like I said, it's this boom, ba-doom, ba-doom, boom, ba-doom, ba-doom. It's just the same tune. So even the talk about how everything goes in a cycle actually goes in a cycle. You start with everything goes in cycles. Everything, the same thing happens over and over again. And then that leads to the same thing befalls, whether wise men and fools or men and beasts. And then the conclusion is the same thing. There's nothing better for a man than just eat and drink and be merry. I keep paraphrasing it that way. He doesn't say it exactly that way. A man should rejoice in his own works. That is his portion. Who shall bring him to see what shall be after him? Now, there's other details that are in between, but, and we may get to those actually in a little bit. But I want to talk right now about chapter 4, because given that, this is what you see repeatedly in these two chapters, chapter 2 and 3 of Ecclesiastes. First of all, does any of this sound familiar to you? Or put it another way, does any of this sound modern to you? Esther? How so?
Like you hear the saying, you only live once.
There you go. YOLO. All that kind of stuff, right? It's very, very, exactly, very similar thought. And all the background, that's the conclusion, right? But all the background that leads to that conclusion is also the same. Yes, Nyasha.
You hear it all the time. Life is short. We should enjoy ourselves.
Okay. What about the premises that lead to that conclusion? Do you hear any of that stuff? A man hath no preeminence above a beast. Even one thing befalleth them. As the one dieth, so dieth the other. Right? God might manifest them. They might see that they themselves are beasts. That which befalls the Son of Men befalleth beasts. You hear anything like that? I mean, nobody would even say people are like animals. People take for granted in this society that people are animals. So this is what I'm getting at here is this is where we're at today. This book very much addresses the society we live in. Wherever we're from, we got a lot of different countries represented here, but we're all living in the US of A right now. And here in the USA, this is the predominant perspective. Nobody in the society hardly gets past the 3rd chapter of Ecclesiastes, which is why this is particularly relevant for us, because we're going to go past the 3rd chapter of Ecclesiastes, and that should give us something to give to the rest of the society that never got past that point. This is as far as the reasoning gets. People are the same as animals. They all live, they all die, they're the same anatomically, physically. Look, we're the same. We all live and die. People are animals. The animals that blah, 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 blah. In fact, they conclude people don't really have souls because animals don't have souls, or they all have souls, whatever. But people, animals, it's the same. So just, you only live once, enjoy the fruit of your labor, enjoy the pleasures of life, pleasures of the flesh, and any morality that curtails that is wrong. Because one of the prime directives of life is to enjoy the pleasures of the flesh, because the flesh is all you've got. This is your soul. That's the view. Sorry.
I was going to say that to back up what you're saying, when I first came to this country, that was the first time I found out that one of my colleagues actually lost a cat, and she bought a burial ground, and actually they had a cemetery. And I was like, what? A cat? Then I also heard of a person who willed about 1 million for her cat after she died. I mean, which really showed you the where they put human beings and animals. I could not. This woman was like mourning and groaning over the cat. And they actually had it. She bought a piece of land.
Yeah, there are pet cemeteries. There's a whole documentary many years ago made about pet cemeteries in the United States. So you can keep this. I've got a mic. I've got a mic there too. Go ahead, Brother Sayu.
And as I read this chapter, but I feel not only yet all the thing is just going cycling, but also it I felt it said human, we are human, but don't be arrogant and be have a humility.
Humility?
Be humble before God because you are same with animal before the God's eye. You have the end. You have to go. You have to finally you have to die. So you have the end. You are very weak. Through this chapter 2 and 3, I can feel that.
That.
Yeah.
Oh well, you're anticipating this is where the book is going. It's not really there yet. The main point, all he says is, since we're all the same as animals anyway, just live for now. Just live it to enjoy the pleasures of right now. There's nothing better. He actually says that way. There's both chapters. There's nothing better. You're right. That's a big the point about the death part. You're putting an accent on that, which isn't here yet, but it's coming. So you and Majesty are on the same page. You get kind of anticipating this point. See, the thing is, we're all here in church. I mean, we could all say the last verse of this whole book right now before we ever even started. But this is starting from a materialistic perspective, what you can see. And if you just start with what you can see, this is the conclusion you reach. But it's not the only conclusion, because that's not all you can see. There's more to see other than the same things, fools and wise men can suffer the same fate. Animals and beasts all go to the same place. There's more to see than that. And that's what we're going to see in a minute. But first, Sister Tosin, I think, had her hand up.
Yeah, I have a question. Anyway, you already answered part of it, because that chapter 3 is like it's talking like an atheist. Like everything's about this life. So
Yeah.
already. And I'm thinking that we are more as a child of God, because once we contribute, once we are serving God, we feel fulfilled and satisfied. So it's like the way he's thinking, as you've already said, that's how the society are now. I'm thinking that my comment is that I don't think it's good to be thinking like that as a Christian. Although we want to enjoy life, at the same time, we want to put God in perspective. I just have that, I'm a little bit confused about that. But it is true that's the way the society think like, but I don't think it's good for a Christian to be thinking like that. Do you get my point?
Absolutely, Sister Tosing. And that's why you should never stop reading the book of Ecclesiastes at chapter 3. Because that's not the end of the book, right? It's like the book of Job. Your point is very well taken, Sister Tosing, truly. It's like the book of Job. There's all kinds of stuff in the book of Job about, nobody gets away with anything, and if you're suffering, you must have sinned, and so forth. Well, that's not true. But it's in the Bible. But it's in the Bible because the book of Job, as we know, we've already studied, it wasn't too long ago we studied the book of Job last. It's, you go through this whole long dialogue between these four people. And there's this back and forth. Job says something, then one of his friends says something. Then Job says something, one of the other friends says something. Job says something, one of the other friends says, and it goes back and forth. And it's dealing, again, with this question about why do bad things happen to good people? Or do bad things happen to good people? So it's, you can't just read part of the book of Job. I mean, you could read a whole chapter and say, well, that's not right. But that's just part of the book. It's part of this long process. And the book of Ecclesiastes is like that. It's part of this long process. You can't just isolate every verse and say, that's exactly how it works. He said, I perceive that there's nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his own works. Well, there is something better, right, as it turns out, than that a man should rejoice in his own works. But we haven't got there yet. So you're absolutely right. My point is that just to paraphrase what you just said, a Christian shouldn't stop at the end of chapter 3, but the rest of society has stopped at the end of chapter 3. This society, anyway. You're absolutely right. In fact, many atheists have said they like the book of Ecclesiastes, like it's their favorite book in the Bible. Some people have even gone so far as to propose that it was an atheist who wrote the book of Ecclesiastes. That it's actually an atheistic work, and then some nervous religious figure stuck the last two verses on at the end to try to undo the atheism of the rest of the book. That's not how it plays out, and we'll see that's clearly not the case. But you're absolutely right. That's all my point is, to try to say we're not just studying a book of the Bible, and we're not just reading this like literature. We want to take this knowledge that we're getting from this and see how other people think, so that we can say, okay, I get where you're coming from. They're just coming from exactly what Solomon went through. I'm going to look at just what I can see. What's the conclusion I reach? And that was the conclusion. If I just base on, never mind what they told me in the temple or whatever, if I just look at what I see around me, this is the conclusion I reach. The same thing happens to wise men as fools. What's the point? Why am I even bothering to be wise? Why did I pray to God to make me wise? If I were a fool, I could be doing the same things. I could be living like a king too. I could be, and I could suffer a stroke even though I'm wise. It's not going to keep me from getting sick. What's the point? Why am I being wise? If you actually just look around you, people work hard and they don't always even enjoy it. The best thing in life is to just enjoy what you've got while you got it. That's his conclusion at that point. But now, if we just look right at the very beginning of chapter 4, what's there at the beginning of chapter 4? Somebody read those. Let's see, who hasn't read? You haven't read. Why don't you read verses? You got a mic right there. Chapter 4, verses 1 and 2.
So I returned and considered all the oppressions that are done under the sun. And behold, the tears of such as were oppressed, and they had no comforter. And on the side of their oppressors, there was power, but they had no comforter. Wherefore I praised the dead, which are already dead, more than the living, which are yet alive.
Thank you. And just for clarification, the last they in verse 1, is referring to the oppressed, right? So it's saying on the side of the oppressors, there was power, but they, referring back to the oppressed, they had no comforter. So you've got these, I saw, so what's this? And he said, I praise the dead. And that doesn't stop there. It goes on and on, considering, actually, go ahead and read that third verse, if you don't mind.
Yea, better is he than both they, which hath not yet been, who hath not seen the evil work that is done under the sun.
Okay, so that's maybe a little confusing again to modern English. Both they means is like both of them. So no, there's both the oppressed and the oppressors, even, who have power on their side. He said, better than both of them is the one who's never been born, because they never saw the evil that's done on earth. So what concept is being introduced here that we haven't talked about yet in this book up to chapter 4? What's the new concept being introduced in chapter 4, in those, right from the beginning there, in those verses? You got an idea, Majesty? I don't know. You're thinking something, though. It's not too hard. Sister Afon, help her out.
Death.
Death? Well, yes, you're right, death, although he's not focusing on that just yet. What is he first looking at? What is he really paying attention to, Highness?
Oppression.
Oppression, right? And if we can expand that out a little bit, think about that third verse. Yes, Soyun?
Justice and evil.
Yeah, right. Injustice and evil, right? The fact that there's evil, that there's unfairness, right? How is that a problem for chapter 3, verse 22, the end of that previous chapter, right? Just immediately before that, where he says, there's nothing better than a man should rejoice in his own works. How is the oppressions and all the evil and unfairness, how is that a problem for his conclusion at the end of chapter 3? Godwin?
Because it says a man should enjoy in his own works, but the verse 3 of chapter 4 says that we have not seen the evil that's been done under the sun. So it's like basically saying that while someone is enjoying in their work, someone else comes in and the whole thing just corrupts.
Okay. Anybody have anything to add to that? Okay. That's not a bad way to put it. Go ahead, Sister Sade.
I was also thinking that he's talking about those that are dead and those that are not born.
Mm-hmm.
So that all the oppression, all the problems in the world, the oppression people go through, how they treat one another, that those people, they don't experience it anymore. So it's even better for them.
Okay. You're anticipating an interesting point, which is that because first of all, let's talk about the evil thing, right? If everybody, to paraphrase Godwin's answer there a bit, if everybody is just supposed to eat, drink and be merry, if everybody's just supposed to rejoice in the works of their hands, some people don't get the opportunity. They can't do that. They have works. They do work. They do labor, and they can't enjoy it. It's not just like all they need is for Solomon to come up and say, "Hey, you're just out of touch. You should be rejoicing in your labor. Just have a good time." They don't. That doesn't help them. There are people that they're not rejoicing in their works, not because King Solomon didn't enlighten them, but because they can't do it. So what's the answer for that? Yeah, sorry, Sister Toasting has her hand up. Was that what you were trying to direct my attention to, or did you want to say something, Gift or Nasha? Okay, go ahead, Gift, and then Sister Toasting.
Could it be that because he was writing about like how there's evil in the world and how that he had access to all like the benefits and the pleasures of life, is he trying to like warn people like to stop seeking like a false like reality of like satisfaction?
Well, eventually, but like I say, this book is like a process. It's like if you start with the idea, just look at what you can see around you. What would you conclude about the meaning of life? His conclusion was there's nothing better than to enjoy the works of your hands. Just enjoy the pleasures of this life. But then comes the fact he looks around again and sees there are people who are oppressed. Again, this speaks very much to our society. In our society, you hear a lot of stuff like this. Not only the YOLO business, but, it goes beyond that to philosophy. A lot of philosophies are based on the absurd riches of this country. A lot of people will say all religions are basically the same. There's just cultural, superficial differences, but all religions basically say the same thing. People are basically good. People are fundamentally good in their nature. People have to learn how to do bad things. They don't have to learn how to do good things. If you just leave people to their own devices, they'll always pick what's good. And this is what you hear a lot. This is even, in fact, the predominant overruling philosophy of our society here in this country. And the reason is, I actually said something like this to somebody who I was in a conversation with many, many years ago, who was saying just exactly this. All religions aren't all religions. They talked to me about my Christian experience and saying, really, don't you think all religions, I see all religions as basically being the same. They're cultural, there are specific details that are different, but that's really, you could put that down to culture, because they are living in different societies, different cultural backgrounds, different histories, and that's really can account for all the differences between religions, really. And I said, that's a philosophy and an attitude toward life that you can easily hold when you live in the richest country in the world. That's nowhere near any other country. Because, we're surrounded by 2 oceans. That's the other thing. So, you can live anywhere in the United States, and you're thousands of miles from anybody outside the United States, basically. So, pretty much overall, this is by far the wealthiest and the most, commercially productive country in the world, and one of the most powerful countries in the world militarily. If you live in a country like that, so that your life is like an order of magnitude or more, or 2 or 3 orders of magnitude better than most of the people on earth, it's easy to think people are basically good. If everybody in the world had this much money, you'd have a whole lot less crime everywhere, because who would need crime? This is exactly why one of the things I've said for many, many years, and many other people have said this too, one of the great blessings of this country is that our criminals are so stupid. And one of the reasons why our criminals are so stupid is because you have to be stupid to be a criminal in this country. It's so easy to make a good living legally. What do you need to be criminal for? You have to be kind of, there's something wrong upstairs if you decide, I'd rather take the risk of getting killed and die a violent death so that I can what? Why would you do that? That's why so many people, and this is not universally true, even in this country, but to such a large extent, and many other countries that are desperate economically, some of the most intelligent people are the criminals. And that makes everything horrible. Because now the people that are hardest to outwit are the people who are doing all the worst things. Right? If you live in a country like that, you are never going to think people are just naturally good, or people just naturally do what's best for everybody else, that people just want everybody to get along. So as soon as you start introducing the idea that there's oppression, then it becomes much harder to maintain the idea that, hey, the answer to everything in life is just enjoy the fruit of your hands. That just doesn't fit reality. Once you see that there are people who are oppressed, and you can't just look at those people who are oppressed and say, well, you know what their problem is? They're just not enjoying enough of the fruit of their labor. That's what their problem is. I remember somebody saying in this country, a minister saying, I can just see one of these prosperity preachers, going over to some starving farmer in Russia or Ukraine or something and sticking a Bible under his nose and saying, hey, something wrong with your faith, brother. If you had real faith, our Father owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. That's not the problem, right? The problem is they're being oppressed. And they have no comforter. And the people that are oppressing them, you can't just tell them to knock it off because they have all the power on their side. This is exactly, almost word for word, what he said. Once you get that, then this whole business about YOLO starts falling apart. And everybody is already starting to pick up on the fact that if you die, and he says that, right? An untimely birth would be better. Somebody who died before they were born is better off. So already he's starting to think maybe, because the question is, if you have this problem of evil in the world, what's the solution? Maybe death is the solution. He's already toying with it. He's not committed to that, but he's already toying with that idea. And notice, I've got this on here, for those at least here in the sanctuary, you see there's like nothing new, then there's no justice, so eat, drink, and be merry. Nothing new, same thing happens to everybody, so eat, drink, and be merry. Then he comes to chapter 4, and there's no more everything happens to everybody. Because what's happening to the oppressed sure ain't happening to the oppressor, right? So it's not everything just happens the same to everybody, right? And nowhere in chapter 4 is there, just go ahead and eat, drink it. That just shuts that down, and there's almost none of that. That just ends that cycle. Sorry, Sister Tosin, you've been very patient. I'll let you go ahead and talk.
I'm just thinking, I have a question. Yeah. I just like that chapter 4 said that talking about the oppressed. I'm thinking that because our society today is like a falling, it's full of the oppression because of the fallen nature. And even we can notice this in our workplace too. Now, the Bible said that the judgment will begin in the house of God. Can we say that there is a correlation between that and our church? That how can we draw the line? Oh, maybe our church is healthy or not? Or if you notice anything, what can we do? Because the Bible says, I was just thinking, is there any correlation between that Bible passage and this chapter 4? That is talking about the oppression, that because the Bible said that judgment will begin at the house of God. So is there any correlation, or I'm just like, yeah.
Well, I'm not entirely sure. Are you talking about, I don't know, maybe you tell me. Are you thinking about oppression in the church?
Yeah, sometimes, because even the Corinthian church said that because there are still carnality. Some churches have carnality. So how can we draw the line that, okay, maybe my church is healthy or not, or I need to be praying for God to do something about it? Because I was thinking maybe there is a correlation between that Bible passage, because the Bible says that judgment will begin in the house of God, and that's chapter 4. So yeah.
Lost. Oh, here am I back? Okay. The statement judgment must begin at the house of God isn't in the book of Ecclesiastes. Just so we're clear.
I know it's not in the book of Ecclesiastes. It's not. I don't think it's there, but I'm just asking, is there any correlation between that and that chapter?
Correlation between saying judgment must begin at the house of God and chapter 4 of Ecclesiastes?
Yeah, that said that that's talking about the oppression. I mean the unfairness in the world. Not like that's the way I just interpret it.
Say this, that when you read about the seven letters to the seven angels over the seven churches, the one that's in the most trouble is the one that's the most like chapter 2 and 3 of Ecclesiastes. The one that just says, hey, we're rich and increased with goods and have need of nothing. Let's just rejoice in the fruit of our labor. There's nothing better. That's the gift of God. I mean, that's pretty much the church of Laodicea, and that was the worst church in the judgment of Jesus Christ. So there's that, but I don't know. Judgment must begin at the house of God kind of stands by itself. I don't know if it needs any commentary. I don't know where that would fit in really with Ecclesiastes chapter 4. This is talking about the whole world. I mean, just saying there is oppression in the world. And there's no real distinction here made between things like the church, or even between Jews and Gentiles. It's just talking about life. It's just the world. I mean, literally the human race. We're all members of the human race, whether in a church or not. So this is just talking about human beings and just talking about the meaning of life. So there is wisdom that's gained from this insight, though, and I would like us to read some of it. For example, verse 6 of chapter 4. Somebody go ahead and read that for us, please. Yeah, go ahead. Let's go with Highness.
Better a handful with quietness than both hands full, together with toil and grasping for the wind.
Okay, by the way, that's great. Highness is reading from a only slightly different translation, which highlights something I wanted to bring up at the beginning, which is really, so thank you for inadvertently calling my attention to that, because I wanted to say this earlier on. That phrase, vexation of spirit, as Highness just reminded us, that phrase can equally legitimately be translated chasing after the wind. And I kind of blew it because I forgot to say it before now. But I wanted to just bring about the fact that this business about endless cycles is really what that chasing after the wind is like. It's almost like our American English expression, chasing after your own tail. We're talking about the image of a dog chasing its tail, which dogs will actually do. At least puppy dogs. They'll look around, and then they happen to see, if their tail's wagging, they'll see just out of the corner of their eye, there's a tail, there's something moving back there. And just being a dog, they'll be like, what is that? And they'll run to grab it. Of course, when they do that, the rest of their body moves and the tail disappears. So they keep, it's over there now. And they'll literally just run in circles like this, chasing after their tail. They're never going to get anywhere. They never get it, And that's exactly the image of vexation of spirit. It's not just like, I'm stressed. It's the idea of you're constantly chasing after something and you never get it. You never get there. So anytime you see that phrase, vexation of spirit, it's this idea of chasing after something. What is it? You never get it. There's like a goal and you don't even know what the goal is and you never get there. There's no goal, there's no end. That's that phrase. But to get back to the verse that Highness just read, it's a very simple idea, but it gets back to, it's all introduced by this idea of evil. It's better to have just a handful, but to be at peace, than to have, I got a whole bushel, I got my arms full of stuff, but you also have toil and misery, because when you realize there is evil in the world and there's oppression in the world, then you realize that happens. People may toil and say, now they can enjoy the fruit of their hands. No, they've got their arms loaded, they've got lots of stuff, but they've also got toil and misery and stress and problems. So, and they may even be working for somebody else and they don't even enjoy the fruit of their own labor. So he said it's better to be at peace, even if you have a lot less,
peace is more important than stuff. And again, that kind of undermines YOLO, right? It can't be all about enjoying the fruit of your labor if peace is better than the fruit of your labor. So go ahead, Majesty, you've been waiting a while.
You can still be very, very rich and be at peace, though, right?
Well, that's the thing. Yes, that's possible, at least for a little bit. But the hope, as we'll see, and this addresses this. I mean, we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves. But what eventually we'll see is that is possible for a time. It's not like nobody is ever happy who's rich. But people don't stay happy that are rich. And it's all, again, just like everything else we've said up to now, it's a lot easier to imagine riches will make you happy when you don't have them. Because it turns out there's all kinds of unadvertised things. This is another song that's very interesting and instructive from the secular world called Nobody Told Me. It's from a simple, riffing off of a very simple proverbial, it's an expression, almost like an idiomatic expression. Nobody told me there'd be days like these. And what that expression refers to when people use it all the time colloquially, like if somebody gets married and then they're facing problems with their spouse and they say, how are you doing? Nobody told me there'd be days like these. Or they have a kid. They wait all the, I have my first child, I have a baby boy or I have a baby girl. 2 weeks later, nobody told me there'd be days like these. There's all kinds of things that everybody trumpets. If you just get this, you'll have it all, But they never tell you the other side. Nobody talks about, I can't wait till you have a baby and only get 2 hours of sleep every night for the next 6 months. Nobody ever says it like that. That's why people say, nobody ever told me. Nobody does. Nobody ever tells you. That's why almost literally every culture has in-law jokes. Because it's literally a cultural way to prepare people to kind of slip it into the tip. Nobody's going to come right out and tell you, no, you think you're going to be happy getting married, but let me tell you, They tell these jokes to kind of brace you for the fact that it's not going to all be, roses and sunshine. And it's the same thing with riches. Everybody just, riches. You see, that's why I talk about these pictures that, celebs. What are celebs having for breakfast? Because you get all these pictures. What do you see of Brad Pitt? When do you ever see, Brad Pitt sitting on a toilet? You never see that. You only see Brad Pitt in a tuxedo, walking the red carpet. You only see, whatever, all these celebrities, out at a, mountain climbing. Everything is a photo op, You just see them like, even if they're washing their car, it's not like you have magical powers to see them when they're washing their car. If you see a picture of some celebrity washing their car, there's like 15 photographers there, and they're like, is the light good? It's all fake. Nobody tells you what it's really like. Nobody tells you about the taxes you have to pay. Nobody tells you about, the fact that when you're in Hollywood and stuff, there's like, you're just drowning in a sea of adultery and like your marriage is never going to last. Nobody talks about that stuff. Nobody talks about that stuff. So it's like when you say you can be happy and rich, I'm not saying that that it's physically impossible to be happy and you're rich, but you have no guarantee. And riches aren't the key to happiness. You're almost happy in spite of your riches. Even, I don't remember which king it was, Solomon or David, King David, that said literally, give me neither poverty nor riches. If you're somewhere in the middle, that's a really good place to be. You still have problems. It's not perfect. But you minimize the problems. If you have like 5 houses, and you hear people say this from Nigeria all the time, but it's just true. You can only sleep in one bed at a time. But if you have 5 houses, you still got to take care of 5. You can only sleep in one of them at a time, but you got to take care of 5 houses. You got to take care of 5 lawns. You got to take care of 5 gardens. You got to take care of, 17 cars. You got to have 17 transmissions looked at. You got to, all this stuff. The more stuff you get, the more problems you get. Nobody ever tells you about that stuff. They just say, be rich and you'll be happy. You can do whatever you want. You know, there's no fairy tale land. It's not like you're just Cinderella and it's just like, oh, think I'll take a Caribbean cruise. Whoosh, off you go. And it's just, it doesn't work like that. So, and that's part of the point here is that in real life, and this is what this book is about, it's like, let's talk about real life. Sorry. Aza, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry about earlier, but I guess just to piggyback off what you said right there, I think and talk about riches and you're talking about, this mantra of you only live once. I think what people don't understand, is rich materially is only a temporary fix. It doesn't fix the condition of your soul. And, as someone who by the definition has been broke, being a college student, and knowing what it's like to stretch your last dollar, it's easy to say that, oh, I would love to be rich because I have student loans, I have car payments, I have rent, you have these things. But at the end of the day, like you said, that's a temporary fix and it doesn't fix the condition of your soul. And so when you're rich, these things you're trying to fill that gap. You know what I'm saying? And I somebody told me recently that I feel like, being rich, quote unquote, I think there has to be a level of strength to that. I think for you to be wealthy, you have to be close to God in a certain way because, like you were saying, all that stuff that comes with it, like it's easy to find yourself, supplementing all this other stuff because you have this money. Like we can't like there are wealthy people probably in the apostolic faith church. Like by the letter of the term, there are people who have money in the church. But that, like I said, it has to be a connection with God where you're close and you're not supplementing this for other things because it can go south fast.
Very well said. Thank you, Aza. So, I mean, poverty is everything it's cracked up to be. You don't want to be poor either, but and riches can be relative too. I mean, I remember when my wife and I first moved to Madison and we were in this 2-bedroom apartment on Allied Drive, I remember weeping when she was out of the apartment once. I don't know where she was, but she like gone grocery shopping or something. I just remember kneeling down and weeping in this 2-bedroom apartment on Allied Drive saying, God, what did I do to deserve to live in such splendor? I was literally crying. I was so overwhelmed with God's goodness. I couldn't believe. And it's just, a lot of people, maybe even some of my colleagues or people that live with could go to an apartment like that now and be like, but it was clean. It was nice. But to me, it was like a palace. So, it's all in what it's like what my mom used to say about, she used to say to me, you eat to live and I live to eat. I mean, there's a difference. We're both eating, but what's the goal? What's the motivation? So, riches are not the answer to the meaning of life. And that's something that definitely comes through in this book. There's something else in this 4th chapter before we move on I'd like us to read, which is verses, I want to start with the right verse. Verse 8 of chapter 4, 8 through 12. Yeah. And this, again, just comes down to not about poverty and riches, but this has to do with, again, what's introduced in this chapter, which is oppression, evil, mistreatment, unfairness that exists in this world. So this leads to this conclusion of verses 8 through 12. Somebody read those verses for us, please. Majesty, you want to do it? Go on. Chapter 4, starting at verse 8.
There is one alone, and there is not a second. Yea, he hath neither child nor brother.
Is the mic working? Do you put it close to your mouth, like this?
Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, there's none. He hath neither child nor brother, yet is there no end of all his labor. Neither is his eye satisfied with riches. Neither saith he, for whom do I labor and bereave my soul of good? This is also vanity. Yea, it is a sore travail. Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, the one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him that is alone when he falleth, for he hath not another to help him up. Again, if two lie together, then they have heat. But how can one be warm alone? And if one prevaileth against him, two shall withstand him, and a threefold cord is not quickly broken.
Thank you. It's one of many verses that are very, very well known. There are a lot of these verses that are very famous in isolation. Two are better than one. A threefold cord is not quickly broken. So, what's the message there? Just briefly, in your own words. Yeah, Majesty.
Two is better than one.
Okay. In other words, what? I mean, it's two apples are better than one apple? Two pieces of pie are better than one piece of pie?
Like you're stronger together than by yourself.
Okay, right, exactly. So companionship, social ties, this is often applied even to marriage. But it's not just marriage. I mean, the point is, man was not meant to live alone. It's better. Everything is better. If there's evil, especially if there's evil out there in the world, it's easier and more effective to face it with somebody else than by yourself. That's the point. I mean, that's why he talks about falling. If somebody falls, because there is stuff and people out there who will knock you down. But if you're by yourself, you just knock down and that's it. How many times my wife talked about how so many people in the society, including people she has known, people I've known through her, have died, and that's just it. Nobody even knows they're dead because they live alone, and somebody finds them days later. It's awful. Yeah, she had a colleague. That's one of the chief people I was thinking about. She had a colleague at Yale. No, she died days late, 2 weeks. And of course, I mean, I don't want to get too nasty about this, but you can imagine the reason why people finally knew that she died, because they smelled her. People in the apartment just smelled this smell and was like, what is that awful smell? And it was her. It was her rotting corpse. She was literally sitting in an armchair when she died, and her corpse was still in that sitting position in the armchair. Oh, was she in her bathtub? I thought it was in an armchair. And there was still just rotting. Huh? She just had a heart attack or something. She just, right? I think her heart just stopped. And she was alone. So there was nobody to call the hospital. Nobody even knew that she had died. This is awful. This is exactly what this is addressing. There's evil in this world. You don't want to face it alone. If somebody had been with her, if she'd had a heart attack, they could have called 911. The ambulance could have come. They might have been able to save her life. She wasn't old. She was like in her 40s or 30s, something like that. But she died, an early death because she faced life alone with her cats. Right? Did she have cats too? Anyway. The cats didn't help her. The cats couldn't call 911. Anybody who tells you, it's the same thing as having a kid. No, it's not. They can't call 911 for you. They can't give you artificial respiration. Companionship, that's right. It's not the same. I mean, you can get a lot of wonderful companionship from dogs, at least. I don't know about cats, but you can imagine you're getting companionship from cats, but that's about as far as that goes. But it's not the same as human beings. Human beings need each other. We need each other. We need our fellow human beings. So that's one of the big lessons from this. And already, again, this issue of death sort of sneaks in again because, and there's, yeah, well, we'll get that later. Yes, so again, go ahead.
Why do some people then think they can live their life by themselves?
Why do they
Like
think they can live by
some
themselves?
people
Well,
said,
listen, I mean, some people, I mean, Jesus himself said some people are called to be eunuchs for the kingdom of God's sake. Okay, it's not, the overwhelming majority of people marry. So let's not have any illusions about that. But even if somebody doesn't, they can have other people in their life. They can be together. They don't have to be loners. They can't, we can't face life alone. That's all there is to it. And this society has really lost something in terms of community, the sense of community. Go ahead.
I was going to say that companionship is not only about marriage. You can still have adopted, children or even friends that will always be calling on you on a regular basis. Even the Bible says a friend that is closer is better than a brother that is farther away. So it's not just all about the companionship of another human being. It's not necessarily through marriage.
Obviously, I wasn't born married. I wasn't always married. I wasn't always married as an adult. But even when I was single, when I got sick, that I couldn't even get out of bed, I was part of a church. And I could call my pastor and say, I'm sorry I won't be able to teach Sunday school this morning. My friend, that she was just my buddy at the time, in Connecticut, actually mailed me food. Because the reason I was sick is I literally hadn't eaten a meal in something like a week. It's a fact. I mean, I ate some food. There was like, I could have maybe literally, I mean, I'm not exaggerating when I say this. I might have a piece of bread. That was it for one day. And then I'd have like part of a potato. That was part of another day. And this is while I'm like walking back and forth a mile to work, where most of the days I would go there and they'd say, oh, we don't need you today. And then I have to walk all the way back and I have nothing to show for it. But because I called my pastor and told him I wouldn't be, because I was part of a church and I had obligations. So I called him and told him. Well, as it turns out, he and his wife were traveling to another branch in Kansas. And he went out of his way on his way back. It wasn't, my town where I was living was not on the way back to where he lived, but he went out of his way to come through to my city and bought me 2 bags of groceries. He was concerned about me, but I said, oh no, Antonia sent me some pinwheels. And then he just showed up at my apartment door and said, you need more than pinwheels, young man, and brought me 2 bags of groceries just for free. So you see, even if you're not married, but you need one another. We need to help out one another.
One time also, when I was alone, I was doing my PhD in my apartment alone, and I woke up with this excruciating pain that I actually almost became paralyzed. I could not get out, and I called him. We were just friends at that time. He was in his own apartment, and I just kind of like could hardly even get to my phone. And I called him. So he came and was praying until our pastor came, because our pastor lived about 1 hour away in another town. There was no church. But it was so good that he had already gotten saved by then. So I had, at least he was a Christian that I could call to pray with me, not to call 911, because I didn't want to call anyone that would call 911. I wanted someone who can pray with me. So he was there praying until the pastor and his wife came. And they were the one who actually lifted me from the floor, because I could not even get out of the floor. So we need that relationship with somebody. Yeah.
So let's turn to, and again, this is all calling into question the original sort of YOLO conclusion that was drawn in chapters 2 and 3. So let's look at chapter 5. Now, this is very important. Just read the first 2 verses, somebody. Go ahead, Godwin.
Keep thy foot on the goest, and to thy house of God, and be more ready to hear than to give the sacrifice of fools. For they consider not that they do evil, but not rash. Be not rash with thy mouth, and let not thine heart be hasty utter anything before God, for God is in heaven, and thou upon earth. Therefore, let thy words be few.
Okay, thank you. And of course, it goes on from there, but I'm just going to stop there and ask what concept is being introduced here? Go ahead, Godwin.
That we should be careful of what we say.
Okay, there's something more fundamental than that. Somebody else, Esther.
Don't make rash vows.
True, that is stated, but there's something more fundamental than that that's being introduced here. You got to back up a ways. Again, we take these things so much for granted. What's being said? Just even in these two verses.
The concept of giving, since I don't know what they call it, offering or sacrifice.
Let's back up here and get really basic. Gift.
We shouldn't be like too hasty in doing things.
It's staring you. Go ahead, Romy. You got an idea? Oh. Ebenezer. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see your hand over there. Sorry, Brother Ebenezer. You can come into the circle, you know.
Yeah, I don't want to come.
Esther won't bite you either. What?
I don't want to come in the middle of the discussion.
Okay, no, that's okay. At least I'll be able to see your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, is it about approaching God with reverence?
Okay, I mean, just even God. Like I said, up to this point, honestly, if you look at all the points, there's the occasional intrusion. Like I think we read it where it says, there's no, I think it was Majesty that read the verse that says, you know, whatever shall be has already been. And then it says, and God shall require the past. These little moments where bleep, there's this little thing about God has something to say about this, but it's just it kind of passes. Even chapter 3, verse 11 is the first place that says, you'll never figure out, you know, everything on your own. You'll never figure out the meaning of life on your own. No man can find out the work that God maketh from the beginning to the end. That's chapter 3, verse 11. But it's kind of dismissive. It's saying it just kind of like, you'll never figure all that stuff out about everything that God's doing. So forget about that. Just face what you got in front of you. It's kind of almost like that. But this time, for the first time, we're really talking face on about God. And as Ebenezer said, not just that God exists, but that we need to be reverent to God. Also, what do you think it means when it says, God is in heaven and you're upon earth? What is that saying? Exactly. Thank you, Brother Romy. He's the boss. He's up in heaven, you're down on earth, okay? He's the big creator and you're the little ant walking on the sidewalk. You know, he's in heaven, you're down here on earth. So watch it. And for the first time, you're actually introduced to the concept. We've kind of touched on it. A couple of people did say things about don't do rash things or make rash vows. The idea that maybe it's not all about just doing whatever you want. If you have to answer to God, then if you just say whatever you want, you might say something God doesn't like, that makes God unhappy. And you don't want to make God unhappy. Just in these first two verses, you get that made very plain. Sorry, Sister Sade, you had your hand up. Oh, you didn't. Oh, you were just stretching. Okay. Okay. So, and if you go on from there, that whole 5th chapter is just focusing on God. It's just introducing this concept of God into the equation. So, of course, it talks about not vowing a vow. We all most or all of us are familiar with these verses about vowing. And we usually read these verses when we're having a lesson or a study or a Sunday school lesson on vows. But it goes beyond that. For example, verse 8, somebody read verse 8, because this issues the question of how can the concept introduced in verse 5 that God not only exists, but he's not just he's not just the big Santa Claus in the sky. He's not just the guy who gives you all the goodies so you can enjoy them. He's the ruler, the king you are accountable to. How does that address the issue of chapter 4, that there's oppression that goes on in the earth? Look at verse 8. What does that tell you? Let's let somebody else. Okay. I'm giving you a big fat hand. Look at verse 8. But I'm saying, how does this concept, according to the Book of Ecclesiastes, how does this concept of God is in heaven, you're on earth, let your words be few. Be careful, right? Keep your foot when you go to the house of God, right? Watch it. Literally, watch your step. When you're approaching God, you watch your step. You don't just do whatever you want. You don't just go wherever you want. You don't just say whatever you want. So the YOLO thing is off the table completely at this point. But not only that, how does that address the other problem, which is the problem of evil, the problem of the fact that they're oppressors? Go ahead.
I think it's saying that even the mighty oppressor has somebody who is higher than him.
Yeah,
that
you
will
want to read
hold
that
him,
eighth verse?
that will hold him accountable. If thou seest the oppression of the poor and violent perverting of judgment and justice in a province, marvel not at the matter, for he that is higher than the highest regardeth, and there be higher than they.
So that's actually answers. It's like, I don't have an answer. Up to, in chapter 4, it's kind of like, I don't have an answer for all this oppression. What do you say about that? I don't know. Now he's got at least a partial answer. There's somebody higher than they. So God can actually answer this problem. Eating and drinking and being merry couldn't solve that problem, but God can solve that problem. So right there, that starts putting a lot more credibility on God as a solution and as a focus than just the pleasures of this life. Also, the verse before it, actually, is really striking because it says, there are also diverse vanities. All we've been talking about is vanities, vanities, vanities. But it says, but fear thou God. So there's a direct contrast there. There's the vanities, there's the, whatever. Living for pleasure, and then there's fearing God. Now that's serious. That's not vanity. That's not vanity. Now, I'm going to stop here for a second and reflect on, there are 3 times, maybe 4, when Solomon says, there's an evil. There's a great evil, something to this effect. There's a great evil I've seen under the sun. And we're going to look at all of them. They're not, like I said, they're not that many. The first one is in chapter 5, this chapter, in verse 13. What are you chuckling about?
I was chuckling about what Majesty actually was talking about, if you're rich, that, you can live, because this verse is saying, the sleep of a laboring man is sweet. That's verse 12. Whether he eat little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not suffer him to sleep.
Yeah, that's right. It doesn't give you peace. It won't even let you sleep because you're thinking, I had a brother who was a millionaire, multimillionaire. He's deceased now, but he was actually even saying, I better not live past 65. He didn't want to live past the age of 65 because he wasn't happy. And this is a man who literally said to us, this is a direct quote. He said, "Money is my God." He literally spent all of his waking time looking at the screen to monitor the stock market. What's the point? What's the point? Where's the end? Where's the goal? It just becomes an end in and of itself. And he actually understood that to the extent that he actually said, "Money is my God." It's like this is just his act of worship. But it's not beatific worship. He was wretched. And he also died alone, and people found his dead body days after he had died. So this is one of the things that you find even in chapter 5. That whole passage, verses 10 to 17, is about you can have riches and it doesn't even make you happy. So now what's the point? But let's just even focus on this 13th verse. There's a sore evil. This is one of the evil. There's an evil I've seen under the sun. Go ahead and read it. Yeah, you kind of started us on this.
There is a sore evil which I have seen under the sun, namely riches kept for the owners thereof to their hurt.
Okay. Now, why is this a great evil? There are a lot of things that are great evil. Genocide is a great evil. Murder is a great evil. Adultery is a great evil. Why is he pointing at this as being a great evil? Go ahead, Samuel.
Maybe because I was thinking of Jesus and the rich man when this verse came. Maybe because if they just let it go, they could have something more than just the money. But because they won't let it go, they're holding themselves back.
Okay, that's one of the things that makes it to their own hurt. But why is this a sore evil, Sister Sade?
Yeah, I think it is the thought of losing those things. Like every one of us, we want to be in control. So we want to, if we are not in control, then there's all this fear comes on you. So those people that have the money, they are in control of everything, then it's got to a point that they have to lose it. Then that thought is really a problem.
Okay, that's right. So you could think of it this way. There are oppressions on the earth. Even if you're one of the top dogs, so now you're not one of the oppressed, but you could be, right? Because oppressions exist. I mean, the fact is, the rich man today could be the pauper tomorrow. Well, how does he become the pauper tomorrow? Because some other rich guy beat him out. And so they're always looking over their shoulder. What if this happens? Have I got this secure? Have I got this? Right? So the thing that makes this, I'll just cut to the chase, the thing that makes this a great evil, I'll go ahead and read one more because we're going to go on to chapter 6. Not the only other one, but one of the other ones, chapter 6. Yeah, right at the beginning of the chapter 6, verse 1 says, here, the sore evil, an evil which I have seen under the sun. And it's common among men, right? This is all from his observations. What is it? Somebody read verse 2.
A man to whom God has given riches, wealth, and honor, so that he wanted nothing for his soul, of all that be desired. Yet God giveth him not power to eat thereof, but a stranger eateth it. This is vanity, and it is an evil disease.
That's right. Now, it is an evil disease because he worked hard to get all this stuff, then somebody else who didn't work at all for it gets to enjoy it. But the reason why these things are focused on as look at this terrible evil is because it completely blows apart everything he would have concluded otherwise. It completely blows apart what we've just said. It completely blows apart the idea that the goal in life is to get rich or rich and famous or whatever, with or without the fame. Because even if you get the riches, somebody else could end up eating it. And even if they don't, like Sister Sade said, just worrying about somebody else eating it will keep you from enjoying it. And you can't even sleep at night. Yes, Sister Shade.
I just remember when we were little, one of my pastors is very rich, but he pastor a very small church, and everyone there was very poor. So he used to tell people that they are very happy, they should be happy where God has put them, that they are the best. So contentment, where God, but it's hard for us to believe because I'm part of the congregation at that time. Because we were like, this man is very rich, he has 3 cars, so he's the one, why is he telling people this kind of thing? So everybody was like, sometimes we laugh, but within me, for me, I used to think about that. But as I begin to grow and I discover, I was telling my husband, I said, this man is actually telling us the truth. But at that time, it's really hard for us to grasp.
Yeah, my wife knew a woman who had, how many Mercedes Benzes or whatever? Just one. She didn't even drive the Mercedes Benz because she was scared to. Because what if somebody hijacks her while she's driving it? You know? So it's like, you know, what's the point? You don't see that side. Again, this is the thing, nobody tells you this stuff, right? They just think it's just going to be this fairy tale life, but it's not. So, but anyway, so the point is, these evils, they're other observations that are showing that just enjoying the work of your hands is not all there is to it. And at the same time, we're seeing that you have to answer to God, and everybody answers to God. And how are you going to answer to God when he says there's somebody who regards it? If you always are going to answer to God, because some people, and he says it in the book, it says the rich. In fact, I want us to get to that in chapter. We haven't gotten to chapter 8. I don't know. We're really falling behind here. Well, let's just briefly say something about chapter 6, because chapter 6 is kind of continuing this thought. For example, in chapter 3, it's verse 3. Verse 3 of chapter 6. If a man beget 100 children and live many years, and also that he have the days of his years be many and his soul be not filled with good, and also that he have no burial, I say an untimely birth is better than he. He's talking about a baby that's miscarried. You're better off being a baby that's miscarried or aborted than being a guy like that. And again, once again, notice we're saying, and it even explains that. It doesn't just, it's not just hyperbole. It says, because that's talking about the baby that's miscarried, the baby that dies in his mother's womb or her mother's womb. He comes in with vanity, with emptiness, in other words. He comes in with emptiness and departs in darkness, and his name shall be covered with darkness. So that's better than to live with all this misery that people work for. It even says, yea, though he live 1,000 years, twice told, yet hath he seen no good. Do not all go to one place. So the point is, this whole 6th chapter is just about the fact that, in fact, that verse 8, is it verse 8? Yeah, verse 8, sort of, and also verse 6. It's like, it's the last time he says, everybody is just like everybody, almost the last time. He says, everybody's just like everybody else. But there's no more, there's no more YOLO. YOLO. You only live, it's an acronym for you only live once. What Esther was saying, you only live once. So you just do whatever you want, live crazy because you only live once. And there's all this stuff. So there's all this stuff more about death, like death is the answer. It'd be better to never be born alive than to live this kind of life. And at the end of that chapter, it says, knowing what is good, who knows what is good for man in this life, all the days of his vain life, his empty life, which he spends as a shadow. For who can tell a man what shall be after him under the sun? The emphasis is this life, right? Because if you're talking about this life, that implies there's that life. That this life is not the only life there is. which is, again, a conclusion you reach just by putting all these pieces together. Okay, I wanted to, let's go on to that leads to chapter 7. What is chapter 7 all about? You can look at just even the first couple of verses, 2 or 3 verses, and you can tell me pretty easily what chapter 7 is about. How valuable a good man is, Majesty? Thank you, Gift, for that reminder.
Is it kind of like set up like Proverbs? Is it kind of like set up as Proverbs?
Well, there are proverbs in it. It is kind of written like in the form of proverbs, so you're right about that. But the question is, what's the content about, Brother Ebenezer?
Is it more about the alternative to what he discussed earlier? Because he's saying things that we need to talk about. Good name.
Well, it starts out saying a good name is better than precious ointment, but he also says, in effect, the same way a good name is better than ointment, the day of your death is better than the day of your birth. That's pretty heavy. But it's basically, a lot of this is about death. Your death is better than your birth. It's better to be in the house of mourning than the house of feasting. Sorrow is better than laughter. It even says the heart of the wise is in the house of mourning. The heart of fools is in the house of mirth. So it's really about death. Think about death. And plan around the fact that you're going to die. Don't ignore it. So now we got 3 things, and because he's already said this multiple times in the book, and now it's kind of becoming more like part of the focus. There's 3 things that you can absolutely count on. You can't always be sure about riches. You can't always be sure about happiness. Can't always be sure about friends. But there are 3 things that you know are always going to be there. What are they? Taxes isn't one of them, even though maybe that could be one of them, but that's not one of them. In this book, what are the 3 things that are always there? Sister Shade.
The time you are born.
Well, that's not always there. It's true. Everybody who's alive has been born. That's true. But I'm talking about something that once you're alive, you're working in this world, say as an adult even, what are the 3 things that are always there in the world that will never not be there? Yes, go ahead, sister. Go ahead.
Well, I'm not sure. Maybe companionship.
Well, companionship, not everybody has companionship, right?
Well,
but go ahead. What were you going to say? It looks like you're trying to change your answer.
Yeah, no, it was still going to the same thing, looking out for one another.
Okay. Well, that's something that's good that you should do, but not everybody has that. I'm talking about something that everybody faces. Everybody.
Oh, okay.
That you can always count. That's what I mean by you always can count on it. Not everybody has riches. Not everybody has friends. Not everybody has peace, and so forth. But there are 3 things that everybody faces one time or another.
Mm-hmm.
What?
Death.
Death. That's one.
Evil. Oppression.
Evil is, people are going to find, nobody has a life that's totally perfect, that there's no evil, there's no sickness. Okay? What else? Majesty.
What if you ask God to not let
You're
you
right.
die?
That's it. She didn't mean to say it, but she said, God. God is the 3rd thing. Were you going to say it, Sister Mary?
I was going to say wealth, evil, and oppression.
Wealth, evil, and oppression. Wealth is not universal. I can tell you that.
No.
No, I'm talking about is something that everybody faces. There are a lot of people who go through from birth to death without wealth.
Mm-hmm.
But there's evil, Everybody has some form of evil. Some faces it.
Death.
Everybody faces death, and everybody deals with God. Yes.
Well, not everybody faces death, because, like, what if you.
You know somebody who never will face death?
Elijah.
Well, he faced death. He faced death when Jezebel was going to kill him.
Okay, what about Enoch?
What about him? All right, yeah, so he was an exception. You might say he was an exception. But everybody else, you're right. Those two were exceptions. That's not going to happen. Well, you get back to me and tell me if that works out. We'll check in a couple hundred years and see how that pans out. Go ahead.
One of the things you mentioned is facing God. Is that during judgment?
Well, that's just it. When does everybody face God? Now, some people may face God during this life, but everybody faces God, and this comes out in the book. Everybody faces God in death. So these things start to converge: death, evil, God, and two of those things last forever. Death and God, right? Evil may or may not last forever because if God judges the wicked, then evil doesn't necessarily, in fact, maybe death is the answer for evil. That's why he keeps coming back and saying it's better to be born dead, then you wouldn't have to face this evil. And God is going to judge the wicked. So God can bring an end to evil. But he can only do it after death because it sure doesn't happen in this life. So these three things, these become the most important things that Solomon writes about and talks about. And all the other stuff is vanity. All the other stuff is useless. It's unreliable. It's spinning your wheels. It's, circles turning around and around and around. Go ahead.
It looks like chapter 7 is also helping us to show us that life is not just about eat and, be merry, because death is going to come. Basically, that's why it said it's better to go to the house of mourning than the house of mirth.
Right.
Because when we go to the house of mourning, it helps us to think about our end. And it helps us to think about God, because we know we're going to face God when we die. Right?
That's right. Okay. So, oh dear. I barely got past halfway through. All right. I'll just kind of wrap this up then. So in chapter 8, the first several verses, he starts to conclude, well, at least in this world, you can obey authority. Oh, actually, even before he finishes chapter 7, he actually says, much more seriously, you can never figure out the answer to the meaning of life. That's in verses 23 and 24. He said, I said I will be wise, but it was far from me. That which is far off and exceeding deep, who can find it out? So, and he says it again at the end of chapter 8. I beheld all the work of God, that a man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun. This is the last verse, verse 17 of chapter 8. A man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun, because though a man labor to seek it out, yet he shall not find it. Yea, further, though a wise man think to know it, yet shall he not be able to find it. So even if you think you've got it figured out, apparently Solomon at some point in his life thought he had it figured out. He said, even if you think you have it figured out, you don't have it figured out. And in fact, not only do you not have it figured out, you are incapable and have always been incapable and will always be incapable of figuring it out. Nobody will be able to figure out the meaning of life just on your own. It's in, as he says in the very next, I think it's in the very next, yes, in the very next verse, at the start of chapter 9. It's in the hand of God. So there we are back with God again. These, like I said, these things start to converge. As you read through this book, you see more and more death, evil, God, especially death and God. They sort of close in on all of his observations. He says, well, if, in chapter 8, at least you should be obedient to authority. But then by chapter 9 and chapter 10, he says, but what if the authority is corrupt? Well, God will judge the authority. Okay, now we're back to God again. It's not necessarily the rulers. He said in fact, the last time he says there's a sore evil, it's in chapter 10. He says there's a sore evil. Verse 5, I think. Yeah, there's an evil which I have seen under the sun, as an error which proceedeth from the rulers. From the ruler, rather. Folly is set in great dignity, and the rich sit in low place. What happens when the rulers and the authorities are foolish? Well, maybe you still have to obey them, but you're going to be miserable doing it because you're obeying foolish policies and corrupt counsel. He still says, curse not the king. And I don't have time now to go into all of that. But in fact, most of chapter 10, by the time he gets to chapter 10, these are just very specific, practical, individual proverbs. It's like the book of Proverbs. They're very valuable for everyday life, but there's nothing here about the meaning of life. It's like at that point it breaks down, because he says it. You can't figure out the meaning of life. So all you can do is address here and now. But and so all these things are like tips for just wise everyday life. But in chapter 11, and chapter 11 is more of the same, up to verse 7. And then it's saying, actually, chapter 11, verse 7, actually, all this stuff about evil and God and death converges and says basically, okay, comes back to the YOLO question and says, okay, you can rejoice in your youth, you can rejoice in the pleasures of life, but God's going to bring you into judgment, though. So it's more important, finally, in the concluding chapter, remember your Creator while you're still young. Don't just focus on the pleasures of life. Prepare for death now, because you're dead a lot longer than you're alive. Just ask King Solomon. He lived to be like 80 years old, but he's been dead for 3,000 years, more or less. So that's going to last. I mean, even you could say, well, but there's the resurrection. But not in this body there isn't. You leave this body, you leave this world, you are never coming back to it, any more than you're going back to the womb after you're born. You leave it, and it's gone for eternity. So spend more time focusing on what's going to last for eternity. God and whatever comes after death. And that's how he concludes it. He said, let's hear the conclusion of the matter. Fear God, keep his commandments. This is the whole duty of man. I wish we could have walked through it a little bit more to really see the how it all plays out. But as I say, seriously, in a very pragmatic way, it's good for us to review, not just for our own sakes, but for those around us who never get past chapter 3. The people who are still thinking, just live for this life and live for the pleasures of this world. Sometimes they say it's not just like living crazy, but it's live for the hearth and home, live for the pleasures of family. But that's not enough either. We want to pray that God helps us to be able to understand, to be able to talk to people and say, yeah, but then what? What happens if that doesn't pan out? What happens when you can't sleep at night because you're worried about what's going to happen to your home? People are worried at the university about what's going to happen to the budgets, what's going to happen to we're not going to be able to get funding for this. We're not going to. Instead of all that worry, what if we just put it in God's hands? And people have been so trained in this society to think, well, if I can't see it, it's not real. But may God help us to be able to show people that there is an answer. The answer is not in this life. That's the real conclusion. It's not just fear God and keep his commandments, but it's that everything in this world is meaningless. Everything in this world is a road to nowhere. There's another popular song. These are all in the secular world, popular song in the 1980s when I was in college, when I was just getting friends with her. It was a very, very popular song. We're on the road to nowhere. The whole song was about that. We're on this road and it doesn't go anywhere. We're just going to nowhere. There's nothing. It's meaningless. Life stinks and then you die. That's almost a quote from Ecclesiastes, by the way. I wish we'd gotten to that verse. You know, it just, if you take that in, but there's something else. And the something else is God and death. I told you about my physics professor, or physics teacher who would, say, no, I'm never going to die. I'm never going to die. And he would say it laughingly because he knew he was talking stupid when he said that. Like, obviously, everybody's going to die. But at the same time, there simply was no room in his equations for the reality of death. But we have that is true folly. It's foolishness to not give an account for what you know has to happen. If you know it has to happen, how foolish to make a plan. It's like making a plan for a road trip that assumes that you will never run out of gas. That's just foolishness. So, yeah.
I really like this. So it's helpful for us as we're living to plan also for the days of darkness, the days of evil.
That's what it says. Plan for
Because,
the days of darkness,
because it's
they
going
will
to
be
come.
many.
It says it will be many. And I think that's why Jesus also said, in this world, ye shall have tribulations, right?
Well, that's part of the reason why. But the main reason is if we follow God's commandments, if we follow Jesus' teachings, we'll have tribulations especially. But he also said, be of good cheer. I've overcome this world. So anyway, we get the message. We came here already knowing the message. But what we want to pray is that this book can instruct us how to get the message across to other people who don't get it. Even people, there are many people, like I said, there are many religious people. We have a lot of African countries represented here. A lot of religious people in Africa. But there are a lot of religious people, like I say, they never get any farther with God than, God bless me. I got this money. There are armed robbers who pay tithes on their robbery because God blessed me with this money that I robbed. God is just the vending machine, the cosmic vending machine. We need to get people beyond that to see that there's more to it. So may God help us. Brother Isaac, would you lead us in prayer, please?
Our Father and our God, we thank you for the word you have taught us. Glory and honor be to your holy name. Father, please write this word in our hearts. Help us to really know the meaning of life, what life is all about, and give us the grace to be able to pass the message across, that having you first and living for you is the most important thing.
Amen.
And that even to enjoy all the things you have created is in your hand. That we cannot just continue going on roller coaster, but that by trusting you, by having you in the equation, then we can enjoy life. Father, come and plant this in our heart. Amen. As we shall be praying, Lord, meet us at the point of prayer and take us, all of us, home safely.
Amen.
In Jesus' mighty name we pray.
Amen. God bless you. We'll see you Friday by God's grace.